Hey everybody, this is Adam B. Levine from Let's Talk Bitcoin. We had so many new show submissions for the contest, we've opted to create a page where you can listen to all of them at your own pace. Visit letstalkbitcoin.com/contest to peruse the entire set, and feel free to vote for more than one. We'll be selecting multiple shows to join the network in Q1. Enjoy the show, and remember to vote at letstalkbitcoin.com/contest.
Today is December 18th, and this is Cash Business, Bitcoin and the Future of Money. We're coming to you from San Diego, California. I'm Jonathan Lieberman.
And I'm Mike Thompson. I'm a former professional blackjack player with a PhD in theoretical chemistry. I'm now working in the financial services industry as a machine learning researcher. Additionally, I trade equity index, bond, and currency futures. And I'm going to try to bring insights from both a fundamental and technical analysis perspective.
And I'm Jonathan Lieberman. I've got a degree in economics from the University of Chicago, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been doing web development since 1993, and I've built and sold a number of companies that are web-related. And Mike and I have been longtime friends, both become quite interested in Bitcoins and the business opportunities, and we've spent a lot of time together talking about Bitcoins and the opportunities for both businesses and arbitrage and trading, and we thought we would share some of our thinking with you. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the big news in Bitcoin today. Bitcoins are plummeting. The world is ending. China has killed everything. Ah! Is the world over, Mike? Is it done? Are we too late?
I've gone into the shed and grabbed all my tools and was starting to build my...
You building a bunker?
Build a bunker, absolutely.
There was an interesting article today in All Things D, that's a Wall Street Journal publication by Jason Del Rey, saying if China wanted to ban Bitcoin, China would have banned Bitcoin. Nobody's sure, but perhaps they're just tapping on the brakes a little bit to slow things down. And so for now, they've limited the trade of RMB, that's the Chinese yuan, into Bitcoin trading platforms. But Bitcoins are not illegal, and they're still being traded in China.
Is the issue that people can't inject new money into the exchanges?
My understanding is that you can't make new yuan deposits, but Bitcoin withdrawals and yuan withdrawals are still proceeding as planned. And the CEO of China BTC has announced they're working with a new payment processor to accept RMB in the future. Now, there was some other news that may have had some effect on the market today.
Another story that could have led to some of the consternation. Yesterday, as Reuters reported, the U.S. Department of Treasury's anti-money laundering unit, known as the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, sent letters warning some Bitcoin businesses that they, quote, may have to comply with federal law and regulation as money transmitters, end quote.
I hope that we don't disappoint our Bitcoin enthusiasts out there, but we are not the anarcho-capitalists that seem to run wild in the Bitcoin community and think there's no role for government or regulation.
In fact, I think we've got a lot of interest in talking about the different groups that are interested in Bitcoin, the entrepreneurial side, the more idealistic side, how the groups can work together, where the limitations are as far as the government is concerned. And I think one of the interesting things with this FinCEN warning letters, why send a warning letter instead of just cracking down? FinCEN spokesman Steve Hudak described the letter as an attempt to gather information. You know, another possible way to look at this comes from Tyler Durden at the ZeroHedge.com blog, who expressed more bearish sentiment when he said that the letters were meant to, as he put it, quote, telegraph the authorities' displeasure with ongoing digital monetary activities, with an intent of halting all major activity before an enforcement mandate is handed down.
That sounds to me overly pessimistic. I think that based on the Senate hearings that just took place, there's clearly interest in the potential for Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies as a way to transact. And I think the U.S. government is concerned, certainly with the seizing of Silk Road. They've seen that these cryptocurrencies can be used to evade government control. But I think they recognize that there is a value and that there is a future in these sorts of things. And if you can't put the genie back in the bottle, maybe you can at least make friends with him. But in other news, according to the Washington Post, the Winklevoss twins hold approximately 1% of Bitcoin, or did in November. And according to their recent Ask Me Anything on Reddit, they claim not to have sold a single coin. So presumably they still own 1% of Bitcoin, which is worth a little less in fiat currency today than it was yesterday.
As we're going through these kind of roller coaster rides of price appreciation and then crashes, if you're a long-term believer in Bitcoin, it could make sense to dollar cost average in.
So let's talk about that, because I am really enamored of Bitcoin, but I hear people on podcasts touting Bitcoin in ways that don't make sense to me. People saying, I accept Bitcoin as payment for my product with a 30% discount. And the economist in me says, that makes no sense. Accept dollars at your full price and buy your Bitcoins if you want. The balance of your portfolio of dollars and gold and equities and alternative investments in Bitcoin is something that you should balance based on your investing strategy and your belief in the underlying value. But why would you accept a 30% discount to receive a currency that you can freely buy? That makes no sense to me.
No, I agree. My perspective over the years has changed a bit. I actually wrote, but never published, a blog post in June of 2011. My basic thinking back at the time was that Bitcoin was a Ponzi scheme.
Make the case that you made in June 2011, why you thought Bitcoin was a Ponzi scheme and why you've changed your view.
Well, at the time, with what I now think is a superficial view, I saw this virtual thing that was specifically designed to increase in price due to its constrained supply, where some mystery founder named Satoshi had already mined the majority of outstanding coins. My wife asked me how Bitcoin was different than Beanie Babies, and I honestly had trouble providing a good answer. Its only meaningful use in commerce was on Silk Road, which I thought the government would shut down at any moment. Whereas now, we are seeing the emergence of additional uses of Bitcoin, including as a tool to evade currency controls in countries such as China and Argentina. Furthermore, if you look back at price in June of 2011, we were in a bubble that had reached to the upper $20 per Bitcoin.
That's right. We were in a bubble where Bitcoins hit the upper 20s.
Yeah, don't remind me. So, but the funny thing is, so I looked at this, I looked at, just the general idea of generating out of a bunch of work by electrons, this money.
And I think that was about the time that you and I first discussed this, and we were with another friend who was pitching us on the idea of mining for Bitcoin, and we did some quick math on the cost of electricity and the rate at which we could mine Bitcoins. And I said, wow, that seems like a marginal deal at best to end up with a bunch of money that can't possibly be worth anything, because if I can make it on my computer, how can it be worth anything?
That's right. Yeah, and I don't know, thinking back to those calculations, I'm trying to remember whether we were looking at CPU or GPU mining at the time, but this was a couple of years ago. When I look back, the more interesting takeaway for me from that experience was I wrote that post June 2011. Price over the next couple months proceeded to decline 90%.
You were a genius.
I thought so, right? So I'm feeling pretty smart, and therein introduced some bias, and I proceeded to say, okay, I'm right, and ignore Bitcoin. And one thing I've taken away from that is really to think of my ideas as a snapshot in time, and always to go back and question assumptions. And hey, I don't know what's going to happen. Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies are either going to be something or they're going to be nothing. And if they're going to be something, it's still early innings.
Hang on, I'm gonna disagree with you there slightly. I feel like Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin is the winner or just a footnote in history, I'm unsure of, but I'm absolutely convinced that cryptocurrencies are here to stay.
I do completely agree with that sentiment. I misspoke when I included other cryptocurrencies in there. We'd like to discuss some differences with other cryptocurrencies. Some are more suitable for commercial activity versus a store of value, or as a commodity might be. And I think there's a role for multiple cryptocurrencies. So we're not just going to say there's one winner here.
I'm not convinced there is going to be a role for multiple cryptocurrencies.
Interesting.
At least not large value transactional currencies. There may continue to be specialized things like the way name coins operate for this virtual DNS system. But I can
see something like, to that point, I could see something like maybe two major classes. One cryptocurrency that fulfills the role of a store of value, primarily, and perhaps a deflationary cryptocurrency could fill that role, and something that maybe does a better job of fulfilling the role of a transactional currency for commercial activity. And there's other cryptocurrencies like Purecoin, for example, that specifically bake in some inflation and really try to take a different approach. And it'll be interesting to think about and to see how this plays out.
Time will tell what will happen in terms of multiple currencies. It's hard for me to understand why in the long run, if we had a low friction, stable value currency, we would need more than one. But I'd like to touch on what it is that convinced me that cryptocurrencies are going to be valuable in the long run, because I've had this discussion with a lot of friends who are, if they don't think Bitcoins are a Ponzi scheme, they're at least very skeptical of the value. And I was initially too, but the thing that convinced me that there was real value here was understanding the system by which this worked. And for Bitcoin neophytes, they're mainly interested in how many dollars to the Bitcoin and how do I get a wallet and how do I make a transaction. But I think the really sexy part of Bitcoins is when you understand this proof of work concept and how the blockchain works. And in short, by doing these math problems where each math problem is the input to the next one, the design of Bitcoin has allowed for a decentralized system in which we can all agree on what's true and accurate without a central authority. And perhaps we'll talk in greater detail about how that works later on, but for now you'll have to trust us on the magic of math that Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, solved an incredibly hard problem known as the Byzantine general problem, in which you have a consensus agreement among multiple parties where you don't necessarily trust all of them and your communications isn't secure. And that's a tough problem to know what the truth is and know that everybody knows what the truth is. But using that in the blockchain mechanism, it turns out there's an awful lot of things that can be built on top of the technology of Bitcoin. That was what really convinced me that Bitcoin is more than just a currency. It's a technology platform that solves a real challenge, this how to avoid trusting a centralized authority problem.
And I think there's a lot of richness in the protocol that we're hoping to explore not only through the podcast, but through potential exploration of business opportunities and to see, look at Bitcoin and the Bitcoin protocol as a substrate for the future of several industries. Finance is only one of them.
This is a good time to talk about proof of existence as an example of an extension of the Bitcoin protocol.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Proof of existence is a service built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain where you can prove that you possessed some file, that this existed at some point in time, by taking a hash. That's a one-way function where you produce a number from a file, and that's very much how the work in Bitcoin works, is to produce hashes of transactions, but to produce a hash of a file and then to make a payment to that hash. Now, because that hash doesn't have a public key pair, you've created an unspendable transaction. So you've lost a little bit of money, but it could be only a penny. And the result is that you have embedded in the blockchain this transaction that at any point in the future you can use to prove that you had a certain file. This could be the basis of a copyright system or a first-to-file patent system. And here we've now done away with a centralized authority, but we can all agree and have irrefutable proof that something existed at some point in time without central authority and also without disclosure. I can register something in this system without showing it to anybody else and later prove that I had it. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Something like this as an enabling technology could be really powerful. Also to copyright law, potentially contract law in general.
We're going to take a short break and listen to a little bit of comedy about Bitcoin from Mike O'Connell, and then we'll be back with more show.
If you don't know what a Bitcoin is, right, usually the way people describe it is digital cash. It's money for the internet, right? But I like to say it's banking light. All of the convenience, none of the evil. Right? With Bitcoin, instead of having bankers or politicians controlling your money, you get rid of them, you just have a computer program. Bitcoin, that's all it is, a computer program. Basically, it's maths, which is good because you can trust maths. You know, like you ask what's 2 plus 2, math says 4. Math always says 2 plus 2 is 4. You ask a politician, you know, what's 2 plus 2? He's like, hey, vote for me, I'll make it 5. Some lobbyist Some lobbyist shows up like, hey, make it 15. Help me out there. Right? You ask a banker, you know what's 2 plus 2? He's like, well, I can tell you, but there's a fee. Also, I can only tell you during banking hours. 10 till 2, Tuesday to Thursday. That's when we're open. Right? When bankers and politicians control money, they use it to help their friends. Bitcoin's good because it's neutral, treats everyone the same. It's very fair because, it's maths, and maths is very fair, isn't it? You never see a maths teacher going, yep, 6 times 6 is 36. Except for Barry. It's different for you, Barry. Right?
The comedy you heard is from Michael Connell, and more of his Bit Comedy 1.0 is available from michaelconnell.com.au. We're back with Cash Business, Bitcoin and the Future of Money. In addition to some of the strengths of Bitcoin, let's talk about some of the drawbacks. I've heard lots of people talk about how credit cards are this old-fashioned technology from the 1950s, and that Bitcoin is the credit cards of the internet, or the cash of the internet, or the future payment system.
What's a credit card? You keep it in your pants, right?
That kind of attitude is fun and funny, but I use my credit card a lot more than I use my Bitcoin. I've heard our esteemed judges, the producers of the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast, a terrific podcast which Mike and I both admire very much. That's why we've submitted this pilot show. But I've heard them bashing credit cards, saying credit cards have incredibly high processing fees, which they do, and that credit cards, when a merchant accepts a payment with a credit card, it can be taken back with a chargeback when a consumer disputes a charge and the money comes out of the merchant's account, which it can. But I'd like to point out some of the benefits of credit cards, that because of this service that the credit card company provides, I feel comfortable using my credit card to buy from a merchant that I don't know or trust. When I make a cash transaction with Bitcoins, if there's a dispute, I've got no arbiter to protect me. And I think that merchants may not even realize the benefit that they have by accepting credit cards, because you can buy from someone you don't trust. Would I send Bitcoins to Apple? Sure. Would I send them to Amazon? Probably. Would I send them to Joe's Electronics Shack? I'd be skeptical.
I really agree with the point that individual merchants may not fully appreciate the value of the system. I mean, it's easy for me as an individual merchant to see the idea of a system in which transactions are irreversible and not associated with any fees to me. And I say, oh, that sounds great.
In a simple view, that's good for the merchant because they've got the money. But in a more robust view, that's a challenge for the merchant, because now the merchant has no way to gain the trust of a consumer that's unknown to him. And we talk about cash transactions, and they've existed for as long as there has been money, but those cash transactions often took place face-to-face among parties that knew each other, and even if they didn't know each other, they were part of a smaller community and there was some accountability, as opposed to a distant transaction where parties are completely unknown to each other, perhaps even anonymous, and there's no mechanism for accountability. So maybe this is an opportunity for a service. I know that the libertarians, every time I raise any objection with any system, the libertarians say, well, if people really valued it, there'd be a business there. And there certainly is a new website. What's the name of the website that does the N of M transactions, Mike?
Bitrated.com.
We tend to think of Bitcoins as straightforward transfers, but in fact, Bitcoin transactions are not just transfers, but they're little programs, and they can have more complicated structures than simply Alice pays Betty. They can have a multi-signature structure where it takes 2 of 3 parties to complete a transaction.
Give me an example case. So I'm a merchant. I want to sell you an RV that you can drive out in the desert and party down.
When I've got to go bury my gold after Bitcoin goes bust. Right. So you're going to sell me an RV, and I don't know you, the vendor. You don't know me, the buyer. You want to make sure that you get payment from me. I want to make sure that the RV that you sell me is as promised. We can use an arbiter as a means to conduct this transaction. This mirrors, but is not exactly the same as a classic escrow agent, where I send the money to the escrow agent, you send me the RV. When I say the RV is good, the escrow agent send the money on. But here, by using a multi-signature transaction, if you and I agree that the transaction is acceptable, we can both sign the transaction, and it will be complete without any need for the escrow agent or the arbiter. If, however, we have a dispute, the arbiter can, working with either of us, send the transaction in either direction.
So it's any 2 of the 3 votes complete the transaction.
Any two of the three votes, either the vendor and the buyer, or the vendor and the arbiter, or the buyer and the arbiter. And of course, you can structure more complicated N of M transactions. I think that Bitrated has a terrific idea, though their model, where anybody can sign up to be an arbiter and post their fees, is not conducive to most consumer transactions.
What kind of arbitration service could you see being valuable?
The kind of arbitration services that credit card companies provide today is imperfect. But I would say that for most consumers and most merchants, it works well enough. If the consumer claims they never got the product, the merchant looks for some evidence that they did. If there's no evidence available, they tend to side with the consumer rather than with the merchant. By and large, merchants are responsible and provide the products that they need to, and that when people try and scam the credit card companies, you might be able to get away with it once, but you probably can't get away with it very many times.
You've seen over the last few years a situation where a lot of the merchants will forego collecting a signature, which forms the evidence that they would have to go to the card network with for transactions that are below a certain value. So you can go to your supermarket and for transactions below $20, not have to sign. Similarly, you might not use an arbiter for a Bitcoin transaction below a certain value because such a service might be expensive.
Well, we already see that kind of security versus convenience spectrum. There are places that will sell you a beer for Bitcoins, and they have a zero confirmation policy on their transaction. If they see you send the Bitcoins from your phone, that's good enough for them. And if you're selling something that's inexpensive and relatively high margin, especially in a face-to-face transaction, I suspect the fraud that takes place there is very low, and the trade-off for convenience is worth it.
And going back to our RV example, you could see definite value in having an arbiter.
Absolutely. And I think that is a business that can and will arise. If you look at, and people like to dismiss Silk Road because the transactions that took place were largely illegal, but it was one of the largest uses of Bitcoin commerce, not Bitcoin money transfer, but Bitcoin commerce. And what you saw that was valuable there was Silk Road was providing an escrow service, and it was providing a review service in which people reviewed the merchants, and an escrow service to ensure that the product was received. So I think there is a real value for those services in cash transactions, and to be dismissive of the value that credit card companies provide is to be short-sighted. There may be better solutions. I feel there are better solutions, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And of course, let's not forget that credit cards provide credit. And credit is instrumental for a large percentage of the American public.
America runs on credit. Well, that's what I've heard.
As Dunkin' Donuts may disagree. I think most people that have a mortgage on their house appreciate the ability to buy a house before they can pay for the whole thing. We're going to take a short break and listen to a little bit of comedy about Bitcoin from Michael Connell, and then we'll be back with more show.
Bitcoin is also great because it's an open source program. That means you can open it up and check out any part you want. You can just investigate anything that you're interested in. Try doing that at the bank. Next time they're emptying out the ATM, just jump in the armoured car. What's going on? Not looking around. When you buy stuff with Bitcoin, it's more private than with credit cards, right? Which is good because, credit cards, when you buy stuff online, banks and governments, they can sort of see what you're doing. That can cause problems sometimes. Like the other week, I bought some books on Amazon about the Middle East. It came up with this thing going, customers who bought this item also bought a trip to Guantanamo Bay. They just didn't realise it.
The comedy you heard is from Michael Connell, and more of his BitComedy 1.0 is available from michaelconnell.com.au. We're back with Cash Business, Bitcoin and the Future of Money. So we've seen some criticisms of Bitcoin as a currency, some suggestions that it's not a currency at all or that it's a commodity. And one of those criticisms has been the tremendous volatility of the price of Bitcoin. Classic monetary theory tells us that to be a currency, something has to be useful for facilitating trade, it has to be a way to store value, or it has to be a unit of account. But what about this volatility in price? We see huge swings daily. Does that mean that Bitcoin can't be useful as a currency?
I think it makes it challenging for people who want to use Bitcoin to do commerce.
Price volatility definitely makes commerce more challenging. Now, it seems like some of the guys like Coinbase and BitPay are facilitating this by dynamically repricing your Bitcoin prices, pegging things to dollars. I mean, they're really doing dollar-based commerce, but with Bitcoin as a unit of account. But despite the volatility that we've seen in Bitcoin, there's a new paper that just appeared yesterday on Coinometrics.com, published by Svi Goldstein, Jonathan Levin, and Scott Johnson, looking at the volatility of Bitcoin and noting that over the last 4 years, it has decreased from 9.5% per day to 5% per day. Now, that still makes it an order of magnitude more volatile than the most volatile currency pairs that are out there. However, this market is desperately seeking price discovery, and in this thinly traded market, it is a substantial and meaningful improvement.
And I would suggest that recent innovations in Bitcoin derivatives markets, potentially in the upcoming ETF being launched by the Winklevoss brothers, and in exchanges where one can borrow Bitcoin to sell short, will help to provide a healthy second side to the market and improve price discovery in Bitcoin.
I certainly hope that increased trade will give us more stable pricing, though I guess it's not 100% clear that greater speculation will lead to greater price stability. That about wraps up what we've got for today. Did you have fun?
I've had a blast. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to continuing to talk with you and get to know the audience better and do all of this as a way to develop my own understanding, what we see as the future of money.
Before we go, and as a way to get to know the audience better, I'd like to leave you with a little puzzle. The difficulty in mining Bitcoins is regulated. Every 2 weeks, we count up the number of blocks we've solved, and we make it harder or easier to make sure that we can solve about the same number that we did in past weeks and future weeks. So here's my thought question for you. If somebody developed an exciting new technology that was 2, 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude faster than existing technology for hashing, if they released that just a moment after difficulty was set, could they steal some large percentage of the remaining Bitcoins? We've got 11 million of the 21 million Bitcoins out there. Could they grab 5 or 6 million in the next 2 weeks before the difficulty was adjusted? Think about that. 4, 5, 6 orders of magnitude faster computation. You've hoarded a giant server farm. Can you make a giant grab, and is it worthwhile?
For example, maybe a Google employee breaks in and gets their quantum computer just crunching away on solving the Bitcoin problem.
No one's supposed to know about the Google quantum computer.
Oh.
Thanks for listening. This has been Cash Business, Bitcoin and the Future of Money, with Jonathan Lieberman and
Mike Thompson.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach us on Twitter at @TheCashBusiness or on Tumblr at cashbusiness.tumblr.com. Our theme music, In a Persian Market, was composed by Albert Kettlebell and performed by Marcus Staub. Tip us so that we know you loved this podcast. Send us your thoughts on this puzzle or any other questions you've got about us or Bitcoins in general. And we look forward to talking to you guys again real soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed the show you just listened to, visit letstalkbitcoin.com/contest and send 0.1 millibit or 0.0001 Bitcoin to the address indicated for that show. Thanks for helping.